There's a simple trick to instantly improve composition and take your landscape photos to the next level, and it's got nothing to do with the rule of thirds. In this video, I'm going to show you what it is so you can create truly unique landscapes without relying on formulaic one-size-fits-all rules. It's as easy as asking yourself 3 simple questions before you click the shutter. But first, it's important to understand why just following something like the rule of thirds or the golden ratio could actually be harming your photography and not helping it. Because if you're only following a guide for lining things up within your frame, which is what these rules basically are, then you're missing the key element that sets your photo apart from the crowd. Think about it, if all you had to do to create a great composition was follow the rule of thirds or the golden ratio, etc., then every photo that ever followed the same rule would be the same greatness, right? It's like sports. So think of your favourite sports person for a second, whoever that might be. Now, they play their game within a certain set of rules, but does simply following those rules that everyone else follows make any one person truly great? Or are they great because of something else that they're doing while still playing within those rules? So my sport is football. 2 of the greatest players of all time are Messi and Ronaldo. I won't get into the argument about which is the best. But when they take the field, is everyone amazed at how they play by the rules and how they don't pick up the ball with their hands, or how they don't start punching and kicking people? Or is everyone amazed at how a Messi or a Ronaldo can effortlessly dribble the ball past 3 defenders before curling the ball into the corner of the goal where no goalkeeper's ever going to save it? I mean, this is a goal. And so is this. They're both a goal within the rules, but one is clearly more amazing and impressive than the other. And it's the same with photography. A photo's composition isn't great because it follows a set of rules. It's great because it does something extra. So the question becomes, how do you add your own special extra something to your compositions and make them stand out from the rest? And it comes down to asking yourself 3 questions before you click the shutter. Question 1. Now, don't write this off because it sounds so stupidly obvious, because it's deeper than it first seems. I actually recommend you write these 3 questions down for easy recall later. So here's question 1. What do I want the viewer to look at? Yes, it sounds obvious, but there is nuance. This is not the same as asking what is the main subject, because you can have a subject, but then everything surrounding it is either supporting or taken away from the main subject. So asking yourself where you actually want the viewer to look forces you to think about what other elements to include to support your subject and which to leave out. For example, do you want the photo to only focus on a single subject, or will you show the subject within the wider scene? And what else within that scene do you want the viewer to look at? A stream, trees, rocks, the horizon, sun, leading lines? Once you decide on the things that you want the viewer to actually look at, then you can line up an initial composition that includes them all. This is not the same as what many people end up doing, me included in the past, which is to just crank your wide-angle lens as wide as it goes to make sure you capture the epic scene. So anyway, once you've done this, the next 2 questions are going to help you tweak and hone your initial composition and make it the best version of itself. So question 2, what can I add or remove? You've lined up an initial composition to include all the things you want the viewer to look at. Now's the time to think about what you can add or remove from the composition to improve it. So one reason to add something that you didn't originally include would be to give the scene some additional context. What I mean by that is, if you want the photo to feel wide open, then you can include more sky into the frame. Even though it's not something you particularly want the viewer to look at, it can still give that openness. Or you can include something with a recognizable size to give the image a sense of scale. Including you or someone else in the frame is a popular way to do that, especially when there's no man-made stuff in a natural landscape for you to include. And another reason to add something might be to give the composition depth. For example, if all of your key elements are somewhat distant, then including a foreground element can do that. It's also important to remove things from the composition that take away from what you want the viewer to look at. Sometimes you'll have to do that in editing, but thinking about it now can actually help you craft the best possible composition in camera. The eye is drawn to many things whether we like it or not. Things with a lot of visual weight, like large or high contrast objects, or distracting objects, or things that feel incomplete, like something cut off unsatisfyingly at the edge of a frame, dead space, and so on. So take a look around your original composition, and for everything that isn't your answer to question 1, ask, does this add or take away from what I want the viewer to actually look at? And like I said, it's impossible sometimes to eliminate everything that you don't want the viewer to focus on. So you can do some of that in editing, and I'm going to share some tips on how to do that right after question 3. Is the composition balanced? This is where you can use the various rules like the rule of thirds as a general guide to double check that things are generally lined up in a balanced way if you want to do that, because you've already made the scene about what you want it to be about. And at this point, it's no longer just a photo that simply follows a guide. But there is also another method that's a bit more freeform and can feel a bit intuitive once you start using it. Now it does require a little bit of imagination, but it's easy to get the hang of with a little bit of practice. What I like to do is imagine drawing lines between the main things that you want the viewer to look at, or the things with the most visual weight. If you have 2 things, then it will be a straight line. If 3, then a triangle, and so on. So once you have that shape in your mind, you can then picture that shape placed within the frame, and you can instinctively know if the scene feels balanced or unbalanced. Like this place that I visited one afternoon to plan out a sunset shot later that day. Now this was my initial composition where I arranged the mountain, the church, and this valley in the frame. Now the problem with this valley is that the large red roof right in the bottom here was dominating the attention in that area. And so drawing a line from here to the church to the mountain, it creates this triangle which, as you can see, is not evenly balanced within the frame because the bottom corner is actually too close to the edge. Now what I could have done at the time but didn't was plan to eliminate this red roof in Photoshop later, because then the thing with the most visual weight in that area becomes this building here. So drawing that triangle now, we can see that it fits quite nicely. So none of it is too close to the edge, it spreads evenly across the frame, and it just feels better. Now if anything, there could actually be a little bit more room on the left of the church before the edge of the frame, but this was a test shot that I ended up abandoning at the time anyway. So knowing that the foreground was going to be an issue, I tried to remove it by shooting from somewhere else, sort of just 10 meters or so to the side. And I left just 2 main elements, the church and the mountain. Now this road down in the corner is now more of a distraction to eliminate, so I'm not counting that as an element. So drawing a line between the key elements now, we can see that the line is floating a little bit to the left of the frame. So to even that out, we could crop in like this. Remember, you're doing this in camera by zooming in or moving around. I'm just using Photoshop here to show you the idea. So now we've done that, the line is technically balanced from left to right, but it's almost horizontal and kind of leaves the foreground and sky feeling a bit empty, so not great. Now the only way to correct that using what we've got here is to crop to a panoramic aspect ratio. Now for me this is probably the best version of what this initial image was, just by using the method of visualizing the lines between the main elements. But my favourite in-camera composition that I got at the time was actually this one here, where I sacrificed this iconic mountain in order to really focus on the church against the general mountainous backdrop. Drawing lines between the centre points of the main areas the eye is drawn to in this one gives us a nice triangle like this. Now there is a 4th question in this equation, but so far we've asked and answered 3 simple questions to help you get a better composition. 1, what do I want the viewer to look at? 2, what can I add or remove? And 3, is the composition balanced? Now I left question 4 to the end because it's one that you'll be potentially asking yourself throughout this entire process, and that is, can I do any of this in editing? Because unfortunately sometimes it's going to be literally impossible to craft the perfect vision for your composition in camera, and allowing yourself the ability to do some cloning and cropping in editing is going to give you images that you'd never otherwise have got. But regardless of how much cropping and creative stuff you want to do, it's still a good idea to think about the regular edits at this early stage too, because with simple light, colour and contrast adjustments in Photoshop, you can draw attention to some things and away from others to guide your viewer's eye through the scene. So for example, if there are some small distractions in the scene like this, then they're probably not big enough for you to worry about trying to crop out of the scene, because you can just clone them away in Photoshop quite easily. Or if the edge of the frame is a little bit too light and drawing too much attention but you don't want to crop it out, then you can subtly darken it by masking a curves adjustment into that area. So now you've asked yourself these 3 simple questions and you've crafted a unique and balanced composition, and it'll all be for nothing if you can't manage to bring the best out of your image in Photoshop. And for some reason, Adobe's hidden one of the best features for doing this away in a hard to reach place that hardly anybody knows about. So watch this next video and I'll show you exactly what it is and how you can use it to give your landscapes an amazing sense of depth.